the lives of sailors and merchants on medieval trade routes. The tar rope burned between Bjorn's palms. He pulled, hand over hand, and the anchor rope rose dripping from the gray Baltic, each fathom a new ache in his shoulders. Behind him, the cog sea wolf groaned against her moorings, her oak planks breathing with the tide like an old man dreaming of younger lungs. It was the second week of April in the year of our Lord, 1347, and the port of Lübeck smelled of herring, pitch, and the particular sharpness of men who had not touched dry land in 40 days. Bjorn Olafsson was 23 years old. He had been a sailor since he was 12, when his father put a coil of rope in his hands and said, "Learn to tie this before you learn to kiss a girl. One will save your life more often." The girl lesson had come later. The rope lesson had never stopped. "Bjorn, stop dreaming on the rope and move your arse." That was Klaus Brenner, the schiffer, the master of the sea wolf. Klaus was a hamburger by birth, 50 years old, with a face like a clenched fist and a voice that could peel paint from a hull 2 piers away. He stood on the quarterdeck, one hand on the whipstaff, the other gesturing in a language that needed no words. Bjorn hauled faster. Beside him, young Jan van Gent, barely 15, his cheeks still soft as a girl's, struggled with his own length of rope. The boy's hands were blistered raw. He had not learned yet that you let the rope slide, that you gripped with the meat of your palm, not the fingers. He would learn, or he would bleed until he did. The anchor broke surface, a massive wooden stock with an iron hook, dripping black mud, and the occasional small crab that had hitched a ride from the Øresund. Bjorn swung it inboard, guided it to the chocks, and lashed it down with 3 swift hitches. His father's lessons, still breathing. "Not bad for a Northman," said a voice behind him. Bjorn turned. Matteo Contarini, the merchant, stood on the main deck with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a Venetian, short, dark, with a trimmed beard and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a woolen tunic of good quality, dyed a sober russet, and his boots were Spanish leather. He looked utterly out of place among the tar-stained sailors, and he knew it. That was why he never touched a rope. "The anchor is secure, Messa Contarini," Bjorn said. "We will load cargo by midday." Matteo nodded, though his eyes were already moving past Bjorn, past the ship, to the warehouses of Lübeck rising beyond the quay. 3 floors of brick and timber, their loading doors open like hungry mouths. Somewhere in those shadows was Matteo's future. Bolts of Flemish wool, sacks of rye from the Polish hinterland, bars of copper from the mines of Saxony. And somewhere in the hold of the Sea Wolf, already lashed beneath the deck planks, were the goods he had brought north. Beeswax from Novgorod, furs from the Russian forests, a small chest of Samite silk from Tabriz that had traveled so far it had forgotten its own language. 40 days from Novgorod to Lübeck, Matteo said quietly. 40 days. A man could grow a beard in 40 days. "You did grow a beard," Bjorn pointed out. Matteo touched his chin. "This is not a beard. This is a failure of razors. In Venice, I shave twice a day. Twice. My barber is a man named Aldo, and he has hands like an angel." He paused. "In Novgorod, I shaved with a knife that had last been used to gut a sturgeon. I still have the scar under my jaw to prove it." He turned and walked toward the gangplank, without another word. That was Matteo's way. He spoke only when there was profit in it, or pain, sometimes both. The cargo came aboard through the morning, a slow procession of carts, horses, and sweating men. Lübeck was a city of merchants. Its streets were paved with the bones of accountants. Every crate, every barrel, every bale was weighed, measured, argued over, and finally blessed with a seal of lead and wax. Bjorn worked the crane, a simple wooden wheel that turned a rope around a drum, lifting cargo from the quay and swinging it over the ship's open hold. Each load required 4 men on the wheel, 1 man to guide the cargo down, and 1 man in the hold to stack it. Bjorn was the guide. He stood on the gunwale, 1 leg hooked through a rope loop, catching the swinging crates and lowering them into the darkness where Jan and 2 other sailors worked like moles. "Easy," he called down. "That one is wine. Not for stacking at the bottom." Jan looked up, his face streaked with sweat and dust. "How can you tell?" "I can smell it. Also, the crate is marked with a grape." "You cannot read?" Jan could not read. Neither could Bjorn, not really. He knew numbers. Every sailor knew numbers, and he could pick out his name on a cargo manifest, but Latin was for priests and merchants. The marks on crates were a different language. A grape for wine, a fish for salted cod, a crossed key for the cargo of the Hanseatic League itself. Symbols carved into wood, understood from Bruges to Riga. Matteo stood on the quay, a wax tablet in his hand, making small marks with a stylus. Beside him stood a Lübeck factor, a thin man named Richter who wore a hat like a collapsed mushroom and spoke in numbers. 23 bolts of scarlet wool, weight 112 stone. 18 bolts of green, weight 90 stone. The indigo from Bruges will meet you in London, as agreed. London, Matteo repeated. Yes. The Seawolf sails for London on the evening tide, from London to Southampton, from Southampton to Bordeaux, from Bordeaux to Lisbon, from Lisbon to wherever the wind takes you, Richter said. And there was something like envy in his voice. The merchant's life, always moving. The merchant's life, Matteo agreed, is a life of headaches in 15 languages. But he was smiling. Just barely. Bjorn saw it from the ship. By noon, the cargo was stowed. The Seawolf sat lower in the water now, her freeboard diminished by a good 2 feet. In the hold, beneath the deck planks, lay a fortune. Wool and wine, wax and grain, a small barrel of pickled herring for the crew, and, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and nested in a crate of straw, 3 bolts of Samite silk that had come overland from the Mongol Empire, through Sarai, through Kiev, through Novgorod, and now intended for the looms of Ghent. The silk was not Bjorn's concern. His concern was the rigging. He climbed. The ratlines were rope ladders slung between the shrouds, and he went up them like a spider, hand over hand, bare feet gripping the rough hemp. The mast was a single pine trunk, 40 feet tall, stepped into the keelson and bound with iron bands. At the top, a crow's nest big enough for 1 man and a crossbow. He checked every knot, every splice, every place where rope met wood. The standing rigging, the shrouds and stays that kept the mast from falling, had been good in Novgorod. It was still good. But the running rigging, the lines that controlled the sail, needed attention. The halyard had frayed at the block. He could feel it with his fingers, the tiny broken fibers like the whiskers of an old cat. "Klaus," he called down. "The halyard needs replacing." Klaus looked up from the tiller. "Use the spare. It's in the rope locker." "It's not. We used the spare in the Skagerrak, remember, when the storm snapped the foresheet?" Klaus's face darkened. He did remember. Everyone remembered. That had been the night when the sea had tried to swallow them whole, when waves had broken over the bow like mountains falling, when young Jan had wept in the darkness, and Bjorn had lashed himself to the mast because there was nothing else to hold on to. Then splice it, Klaus said. You have rope, you have hands. Bjorn climbed down, fetched a coil of new rope from the emergency stores beneath the aft deck, and climbed back up. Splicing was slow work, done one strand at a time, weaving the new rope into the old until they became one. It required patience, which Bjorn had, and good light, which he did not. The sun was past its zenith now, the afternoon, already thinking about evening. He worked until his fingers bled. Then he worked some more. They sailed on the evening tide. The wind came from the east, a fair breeze that filled the single square sail and pushed the Sea Wolf away from Germany, toward Denmark, toward the Skagerrak, toward the North Sea and whatever waited there. The sails, weathered brown, patched in 3 places, bellied out like the chest of a man taking a deep breath before a fight. Bjorn stood at the bow, watching Lübeck shrink. The city's 7 spires, or was it 8? He could never remember, sank into the haze. And then there was only water and sky, and the feeling that always came at the beginning of a voyage. A hollow in the stomach that was not quite fear and not quite hope, but something between the two. John stood beside him, clutching the railing with both hands. The boy had been seasick for the first 3 days of the last voyage. He would be seasick again. It was a rite of passage, like the blisters on his palms, like the first time he would have to climb the mast in a storm. Do you ever get used to it? Jan asked. The leaving? Bjorn considered the question. He had left Visby when he was 12. He had left a girl in Bergen when he was 17. A redhead named Sigrid who had smelled of wool and summer. He had left a tavern in Bruges, a woman in London, a half-finished game of dice in Hamburg. He was always leaving. It was the job. No, he said. You just get better at pretending. Jan nodded, though he did not understand. Not yet. Behind them, Klaus called out orders. 2 sailors adjusted the sail's angle, pulling the sheets until the canvas caught the wind just so. The Sea Wolf heeled slightly, her bow cutting a white furrow in the gray water, and the coast of Germany became a memory. Matteo Contarini sat on a coil of rope near the tiller, a ledger book open on his lap, writing by the fading light. He was calculating something, profit margins perhaps, or the cost of insuring the Samite silk against pirates. Pirates were a fact of life in the Baltic and the North Sea, the victual brothers, the like dealers, the privateers who sailed under no flag but their own. They were merchants too, in a way. They just preferred to acquire their goods without the bother of payment. Strange, Matteo muttered to himself. The insurance on the silk is higher than the silk itself. Then why insure it? Klaus asked. Because if I lose the silk, I lose the profit on the silk. If I lose the insurance, I only lose the premium. Mathematics, Captain. The merchant's sword and shield. Klaus spat over the side. My sword and shield are this ship and this crew. Then we are both armed, Matteo said and returned to his ledger. The first night at sea was always the hardest. The Sea Wolf carried no lanterns. Fire was too great a risk on a wooden ship coated in tar. So the darkness was absolute. The stars came out cold and sharp as broken glass, and the Milky Way spilled across the sky like a river of milk. Bjorn lay on the deck, wrapped in his wool cloak, using his sea chest as a pillow. Around him, the other sailors slept in their own nests of rope and canvas, no hammocks on a cog. You slept where you fell. He did not sleep. He lay awake and listened to the ship. Every sailor knew his ship's voice. The sea wolf spoke in groans and creaks, in the slap of waves against the hull, in the whine of the wind through the rigging. Tonight she spoke of contentment. The wood was happy, the ropes were happy, the sea was calm. Bjorn knew it would not last. The North Sea was a bitch, and she had no favorites. He thought about Sigrid. He had not seen her in 3 years. She was probably married now to a fisherman or a farmer, someone who stayed in one place, someone who came home every night. He tried to imagine that life, a bed that did not move, a roof that did not leak, a woman who would still be there in the morning, and found that he could not. The sea had gotten into his blood. It was an illness with no cure. "You are awake," said a voice in the darkness. Matteo emerged from the aft cabin, a small space no bigger than a closet, which he shared with the cargo manifests and a barrel of drinking water. He carried a leather cup and sat down beside Bjorn with the careful movements of a man who did not trust the darkness. "I am always awake the first night," Bjorn said. "The ship talks too much. The ship does not talk. The wood expands and contracts with the temperature. The ropes stretch and relax. It is physics. In Venice, do they teach you to call the wind physics? In Venice, we call the wind annoying because it never blows the direction we want." Matteo took a sip from his cup. "But yes, we also have poets who call it other things. They are usually wrong." They sat in silence for a while. The stars moved overhead, slow as the turning of a mill wheel. Bjorn could pick out the North Star, the sailor's friend, the one point in the sky that never moved. His father had taught him that too. Find the North Star, and you will never be lost. Even if you are lost, you will know which way is north. "Do you have a family?" Matteo asked suddenly. Bjorn blinked. Merchants did not ask personal questions. Personal questions led to personal attachments, and personal attachments led to bad business decisions. But perhaps Matteo was lonely. Perhaps everyone was lonely on the first night at sea. A father in Visby, a sister married to a cooper in Raval. No wife, no children. "Good," Matteo said. "No one to miss you if you drown." Bjorn laughed despite himself. "That is a dark way to see it. That is a merchant's way to see it. Sentiment is expensive. It costs you time, it costs you focus, and sometimes it costs you money. My father taught me. Matteo, love is a cargo you cannot sell. Do not carry more than you can afford." Was he a merchant? He was a fool. Matteo drained his cup. But a successful fool. He died rich, hated by everyone who knew him. It is a kind of legacy. He stood up, brushed off his tunic, and disappeared back into his cabin. Bjorn lay on the deck, watching the stars, and thought about the difference between a merchant's death and a sailor's death. A merchant died in a bed surrounded by ledgers. A sailor died in the water surrounded by nothing. He was not sure which was worse. The second day brought wind. Not storm wind, not yet, but a stiff breeze from the northwest that pushed the Sea Wolf off course and forced Klaus to tack. Tacking with a square sail was a slow, clumsy business. You turned the ship so the wind came from the side, then from the other side, each turn losing ground. A lateen rig could sail closer to the wind. A cog could not. "Ahead 2 points," Klaus called. "Helmsman, answer the helm." The helmsman, a grizzled Frisian named Peter, pushed the whipstaff. The rudder turned, the ship turned, and the sail flapped briefly before filling again. The Sea-Wolf resumed her course, though she had lost a mile to the south. Matteo stood at the rail, watching the horizon with a spyglass, a new instrument, expensive, made by a craftsman in Bruges. He had paid 15 shillings for it and considered it the best investment he had ever made. "Sail?" he said. Klaus was at his side in 3 strides. "Where?" "Southeast. 2 leagues, maybe 3. Klaus took the spyglass, squinted through it. The sail was small, distant, a white triangle against the gray sea. It was moving north, toward them. "Can you see our flag?" Klaus asked. "No, too far." The crew felt the shift in mood before they understood its cause. Men stopped working and started watching. John's hands went to the knife at his belt. Bjorn flexed his fingers, feeling for the axe he had lashed to the mast. Pirates did not always attack. Sometimes they were just passing by. Sometimes they were merchants themselves, hauling rye or timber or salted fish. But sometimes they were victual brothers, descendants of the privateers who had once fought for the Danish crown and now fought for no one except themselves. They had ships, they had weapons, they had nothing to lose. "Prepare the ship," Klaus said quietly, "just in case." Bjorn moved to the weapons locker. A reinforced chest bolted to the deck near the mast. Inside, 6 crossbows, a bundle of bolts, 4 boarding axes, and a single sword that Klaus kept for himself. Bjorn took a crossbow, wound the crank, loaded a bolt. The motion was automatic, muscle memory from 100 drills. The other sailors armed themselves. Jan took an axe, though his hands shook. Peter the helmsman stayed at the tiller, but a crossbow lay at his feet. Only Matteo remained unarmed. He stood at the rail, still watching through his spyglass, his expression unreadable. "Merchant," he said. "What?" Klaus demanded. "They are flying a flag. The 3 Lions of England. That is an English merchant ship, not a pirate." He lowered the spyglass. "Though to be fair, the English are sometimes pirates. It depends on the king's mood." The tension eased but did not disappear. The 2 ships passed within a quarter mile, close enough to see faces. The English ship was a cog like the Sea-Wolf, slightly larger, her crew waving from the rail. Bjorn waved back. The English captain shouted something that was lost to the wind. "God save the king," Matteo translated. He said, "God save the king." "Which king?" Klaus asked. "Does it matter?" They sailed on. The English ship faded into the haze, and the Sea-Wolf was alone again on the gray water. The Skagerrak's teeth. The Skagerrak does not forgive. It is not the worst sea in the world. That honor belongs to the Bay of Biscay, or the waters off Cape Horn, or the screaming channel between Iceland and Greenland, where the cold meets the cold, and the waves have no bottom. But the Skagerrak is the sea that sailors remember. It is the place where the Baltic ends and the ocean begins, where the salt changes, where the tide remembers that it owes nothing to kings or merchants. By the 3rd day out of Lübeck, the wind had shifted. It came now from the southwest, wet and cold, carrying the smell of rain and something older. The deep, the dark. The place where fish have no eyes and light has never been. Bjorn stood at the bow, watching the sky. He did not like the sky. The clouds were the wrong color. Not the fluffy white of summer, not the heavy gray of ordinary rain, but a greenish yellow, like a bruise, that had healed badly. His father had taught him that sky. That sky means the sea is angry. That sky means you tie yourself to something solid and pray to whatever God you have left. clouds look strange, Jan said. He had come up beside Bjorn, his face pale beneath the freckles. They do. What do they mean? Bjorn considered lying. He considered saying nothing. Boy, go back to your rope. But lies at sea are like leaks in the hull. They seem harmless until they drown you. They mean a storm. A bad one. The kind that breaks ships. Jan swallowed. His hands went to the knife at his belt, a nervous habit he had picked up from the older sailors. Will we die? Probably not. Probably. The sea decides. Bjorn put a hand on the boy's shoulder. But if we do, you won't be alone. That's something. Jan nodded, though his eyes were wide as coins. He was 15. He had not yet learned that most of life is just waiting to see what happens next. Klaus saw the sky too. He had been sailing the northern seas for 35 years, since he was a boy of 12. Younger even than Jan. And he had learned to read weather the way a priest reads Latin. The clouds were not good. The pressure in his ears was not good. The way the waves had started to march in long, orderly lines, each one higher than the last, was not good. Peter, he said, put her on a starboard tack. We're going to ride it out. Peter pushed the whipstaff. The Seawolf turned, her bow swinging east, then northeast, then east again. Klaus wanted her bow into the wind. It was the only way to survive a North Sea storm. Point the ship into the waves, let them lift her and drop her, lift her and drop her, and pray that the wood held and the caulking stayed tight. All hands, Klaus called. Lower the sail, half-mast. No, reef it, double reef. Reefing a square sail meant tying it up from the bottom, reducing the area that could catch the wind. It was dangerous work, done from the yardarm 40 feet above the deck, with the ship already beginning to pitch. Bjorn went up. He was the best climber, the lightest, the one with the coldest head. He took 2 sailors with him, Eric, a Norseman with hands like hams, and little Thomas from Stralsund, who weighed about as much as a wet cat and had the balance of one. They climbed the rat lines, the rope ladder swaying beneath them. Below, the deck had started to move in ways that hurt the stomach. A wave hit the bow, and a sheet of gray water exploded over the forecastle, drenching the men on the yardarm. Bjorn tasted salt. He tasted his own fear, sharp as bile. Tie the reef points, he shouted, from the middle out. They worked quickly, each man tying a section of sail, pulling the rope through the canvas and cinching it tight. The wind was rising now, a steady shriek that made speech impossible. Bjorn tied his knots, checked them, tied them again. His fingers moved by memory, but his mind was somewhere else. In Visby, perhaps, at his father's table, eating herring and potatoes and pretending he was not afraid of the sea. The sail reduced. The wind pushed. The Seawolf rose and fell, and somewhere to the west, the storm opened its mouth and began to swallow the sky. Matteo Contarini had seen storms before. He had crossed the Adriatic in winter, had rounded the Peloponnese in a galley with a Greek captain who drank seawater and called it holy. He had been in Alexandria when the Khamsin blew, a wind so hot it could cook an egg on a stone, but he had never been in a storm like this. He sat in his cabin, a space no bigger than a coffin, really, with his ledger book clutched to his chest. The ship rolled, and he rolled with it, his body learning the rhythm whether he wanted to or not. Around him, the cargo shifted. The bolts of wool groaned against their lashings. The barrel of pickled herring slid 2 inches to the left, then 2 inches back. The crate of samite silk. The precious, expensive, irreplaceable samite silk. stayed where it was, lashed to the ship's frame with rope that Bjorn had tied himself. Good rope, Matteo thought. Good sailor. I will give him a bonus if we survive. Then a wave hit the side of the ship, and everything went sideways, and Matteo's head hit the bulkhead, and the bonus became a distant dream. Above deck, the world had become a single color. Gray. Gray sky, gray sea, gray foam, gray fear. The rain came horizontally, needles of cold that found every gap in every cloak. The wind had a voice now, not a shriek but a roar, the sound of 1,000 wolves hunting together. Klaus stood at the tiller, his hands white on the wood. Peter was beside him, helping to hold the whipstaff steady. The sea-wolf wanted to turn sideways to the waves, to present her flank to the storm and let the water break over her rail. Klaus would not let her. He fought the tiller with every muscle in his back, his face a mask of concentration. "More sail," he shouted. "Just a little. We need steerage way." Bjorn heard him. He crawled across the deck, gripping the rope lifelines that had been strung along the gunwale, and began to ease the reef points. The sail caught the wind, and the sea-wolf lurched forward, her bow digging into the next wave instead of being lifted over it. Water poured across the deck, knee-deep, then waist-deep, then gone as the ship rose again. Jan was gone. Bjorn saw it happen. One moment the boy was clinging to the mast, his arms wrapped around the pine trunk like a lover. The next moment, a wave, bigger than the others, a wave that seemed to have been waiting for this exact moment, swept across the deck and took him. John's hands slipped. His mouth opened in a scream that the wind ate, and then he was in the water, 10 feet from the ship, 20 feet, 30 feet, his head a small dark dot on the gray foam. "Man overboard!" Bjorn's voice tore out of him, raw and primal. "Man overboard!" He did not think. He did not calculate. He grabbed a coil of rope from the deck, the same rope he had spliced the day before, and tied one end around his waist. The other end he looped around a belaying pin. Then he jumped. The water was cold. Not cold like a winter bath, not cold like the rivers of his childhood. This was a cold that stopped the heart, that squeezed the lungs, that turned the blood to slush. Bjorn surfaced, gasping, and saw Jan 20 yards away, thrashing, his face turned toward the sky. He swam. The rope paid out behind him, and he felt the belaying pin hold for now. The waves pushed him sideways, pulled him under, threw him up again. He swam not with skill, but with desperation, the way a drowning man swims, which is to say not well but without ceasing. He reached Jan. The boy's eyes were open but not seeing. His lips were blue. His hands clawed at Bjorn's cloak, trying to climb him like a tree. Bjorn knew that if Jan kept pulling, they would both drown. He did the only thing he could. He hit Jan across the face with his open palm, hard enough to shock, hard enough to stop the thrashing. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop and hold on!" Jan stopped. His arms went around Bjorn's neck, and Bjorn began to pull them both back toward the ship. Hand over hand on the rope, the way he had pulled the anchor, the way he had pulled 1,000 ropes in his life. The sea-wolf was a dark shape in the gray, her bow rising and falling like a beast breathing. Klaus had seen them. Klaus was turning the ship, trying to bring her alongside without crushing them against the hull. It took forever. It took no time at all. Hands reached down from the deck. Eric's huge hands, Thomas's small ones, even Peter's leaving the tiller for one crucial second. They hauled Jan over the gunwale, then Bjorn. Bjorn collapsed on the deck, coughing water, his body shaking with cold and something that felt like relief, but tasted like exhaustion. Jan lay beside him, not moving. For a terrible moment, Bjorn thought he had drowned anyway. Then the boy coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and vomited seawater onto the deck. He was alive. Barely, but alive. Klaus looked down at them, his face unreadable. "Stupid," he said, "stupid and brave. They are the same thing." He turned to Peter. "Get them below, get them dry. The storm is not done with us." The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, the Seawolf lost her bowsprit, the short mast that jutted from the bow used to secure the forestay. A wave snapped it like a twig, and the broken wood dangled over the side, pounding against the hull. Bjorn and Eric crawled out onto the bow, tied themselves to the rail, and sawed the wreckage away with a boarding axe. The waves tried to pull them off. The wind tried to freeze them where they stood. They did not stop. On the second day, a seam opened in the hull. Just a small one, a finger's width, a few feet below the waterline, but the water came in. A steady trickle at first, then a stream, then something that needed a name. Klaus sent Thomas into the hold with a hammer and oakum, the tarred hemp that sailors use for caulking. Thomas worked in the dark, knee-deep in cold water, while the other men passed down buckets, and the ship's pump worked without rest. On the third day, the wind began to fall. It happened slowly, as if the storm was a tired animal finally lying down to sleep. The waves remained high. They would remain high for another day, at least, but the shriek became a howl, and the howl became a moan, and the moan became a whisper. By evening, the sky showed patches of blue. The Seawolf was still afloat. Her mast was intact. Her crew was exhausted but alive. Even Jan, wrapped in a blanket in the aft cabin, had stopped shivering and started complaining about the taste of salt water. "Never again," he said for the third time. "I am never going to sea again." "You said that yesterday," Matteo observed. He was sitting on his sea chest, his ledger book open in his lap, making notes by the light of a small lantern. The storm had not damaged the cargo, thanks to Bjorn's lashings and a great deal of luck, and Matteo was calculating the value of his survival. "Today I mean it," Jan said. "You will mean it tomorrow too. And the day after, and then one day you will forget." Matteo dipped his quill in the ink bottle. "The sea is like a bad woman. She beats you, and you swear you will leave her, and then she smiles at you, and you stay." Jan did not understand the metaphor. He was 15. He had never been beaten by a woman, good or bad, but he understood that Matteo was trying to comfort him, in the only way a merchant knew how, by telling the truth. On the fourth morning, the Seawolf entered the North Sea. The Skagerrak was behind them now, a memory, a scar, a story they would tell in taverns from London to Lubeck. Ahead lay the open water, the deep, the place where the Dogger Bank rose from the seabed like a drowned mountain, where the cod swam in schools so thick you could almost walk on them. Bjorn stood at the bow again, his favorite place. The wind was light, the sea was calm, and the sun, actual sun, warmed his face. He had not slept in 3 days. His hands were raw, his back ached, and his lungs still tasted salt. But he was alive. And the ship was alive. And somewhere to the west, beyond the horizon, lay England. "Do you think Jan will really leave the sea?" asked a voice behind him. Matteo had come to the bow, moving with the careful grace of a man who had finally found his sea legs. He carried a leather cup of watered wine and offered it to Bjorn. "No," Bjorn said. He took the cup, drank, handed it back. "Jan is like the rest of us. He has nowhere else to go. The sea is not a choice for men like us. It is a sentence." Matteo considered this. "In Venice, we say that every man has a master. Some have a king, some have a god, some have a wife, and some have the sea. The sea is the hardest master, but also the fairest. She pays what you earn. And what have I earned?" Matteo looked at him, really looked the way a merchant looks at a piece of goods, assessing its value. "You saved the boy, you saved the silk. Because without the boy, you would have been in the hold, not on the yardarm, and the lashings might have failed. You saved this voyage. Whatever profit I make in London, you will have a share." Bjorn shook his head. "I did not save the voyage. I did my job." "Yes," Matteo said. "That is what saving a voyage looks like. A man doing his job when everyone else is too afraid to move." He turned and walked back towards the tiller, leaving Bjorn alone with the sun and the sea and the strange feeling that he had just been complimented in a language he did not fully understand. London and the weight of wool. The Thames estuary is not beautiful. It is brown and shallow, full of shifting sandbars and the wreckage of ships that did not read the tides correctly. But to a sailor who has just survived the North Sea in spring, the Thames is the most beautiful place in the world. The Sea-Wolf entered the estuary on the 8th day out of Lübeck. The sky was overcast but calm, and the wind, what there was of it, came from the south, pushing them slowly upriver. The tide helped, lifting the ship over the shallows, carrying her past the marshes of Essex and the low hills of Kent. Bjorn stood at the bow, watching for the first sign of London. He had been here before, 3 years ago, on a different ship with a different crew. London had been a city of smoke and noise, of bells and shouts, and the smell of shit in the streets. It was also a city of money, more money than Bjorn had ever seen in one place, and that was why the merchants loved it. "There," Matteo said, pointing with his spyglass. "The tower." The white tower of London rose from the mist like a ghost. It was not white, not anymore, but a grayish yellow, the color of old bone. Behind it, the city sprawled along the north bank of the river, a maze of wooden houses and stone churches and narrow streets that had not been planned by anyone. "The tower," Bjorn repeated. "The king's prison." "The king's treasury," Matteo corrected. "Also his armory, his mint, his menagerie, and occasionally his prison. The English do not believe in separate buildings for separate purposes. It saves money. They sailed past the tower, past the wharves and the quays, past the fishing boats and the ferries, and the small wherries that darted between the larger ships, like water beetles. The Sea-Wolf found her berth at Billingsgate, the oldest port in London, where the Romans had once landed their ships and where the Hanseatic League now kept a warehouse. The gangplank went down. Matteo was the first man off the ship, his ledger book tucked under his arm, his face already set in the expression he wore when dealing with customs officials, friendly, deferential, and utterly immovable. Bjorn stayed on the ship. His job was not done yet. The cargo had to be unloaded, counted, inspected, and stored. The ship had to be cleaned, repaired, and made ready for the next leg of the voyage. There was no rest for a sailor, not in port, not anywhere. But that night, after the work was done, Bjorn walked into London. He went with Eric and Tomas, the three of them stumbling off the ship like men who had forgotten how to walk on solid ground. The sensation was familiar and strange at the same time. The ground did not move, and yet Bjorn's body kept moving, swaying slightly, as if he were still on the deck. "Drink," Eric said. It was not a question. They found a tavern near the bridge, a place called the Salty Dog. It was not the kind of tavern that merchants frequented. It was the kind of tavern that sailors frequented. Dark, loud, and smelling of spilled ale and older, less pleasant things. The floor was packed dirt. The tables were rough planks on barrels. The women who served the drinks had seen better days and worse men. Eric ordered a pot of ale, not a cup, a pot, the size of a small bucket, and they drank in silence. The ale was thin and sour. Not as good as the beer in Hamburg or the ale in Bruges, but it was wet and it had alcohol in it, and that was enough. 3 shillings a week, Thomas said. That is what they pay us. 3 shillings. A whore costs 2 pence. A loaf of bread costs a halfpenny. Do the math. Math is for merchants, Eric said. We are not merchants. We are poorer than merchants. We are poorer than everyone. That is why we drink. Bjorn listened but did not speak. He was thinking about Jan, left behind on the ship because the boy was still too weak to walk. He was thinking about the storm, about the rope around his waist, about the moment when he had hit Jan across the face to stop him from drowning them both. He had never hit anyone like that before. He hoped he would never have to do it again. A woman sat down beside him. She was maybe 30, maybe 40, with dark hair and dark eyes, and a smile that did not reach either. You look like you need company, she said. I need sleep, Bjorn said. Sleep is for the dead. I am for the living. She put a hand on his arm. 2 pence, you can have anything you want. Bjorn looked at her. He thought about Sigrid, the redhead in Bergen, who had smelled of wool and summer. He thought about the tavern in Bruges, the woman whose name he had forgotten, whose face he had forgotten, whose body he remembered only as warmth in the cold. He thought about how lonely the sea was, and how lonely the land was, and how sometimes the difference did not matter. 2 pence, he said. For the whole night? For the whole night, she said. But you have to buy me a drink first. He bought her a drink. He did not remember her name. He did not ask. The next morning the work began again. Matteo had found a buyer for the furs, a London mercer named Godfrey Finch, who had a shop on Cheapside and a reputation for paying his debts on time. The wool was consigned to a Flemish agent, who would ship it to Bruges on the next tide. The wax and the grain went to a local factor who sold them to the bakers and the chandlers and the candle makers who kept London lit. Only the Samite silk remained. Matteo had not found a buyer yet. He was not worried. Samite silk was rare, and rare things found buyers eventually. The trick was to wait, to let the price rise, to not appear too eager. The English do not understand silk, he told Klaus over breakfast, a meal of bread, cheese, and the last of the pickled herring. They think it is for bishops and brides. They do not realize that a man can wear silk under his armor, that it will stop an arrow better than leather, that it will keep him warm in winter and cool in summer. I will have to educate them. You will have to find a buyer, Klaus said. We sail for Southampton in 3 days. 3 days is enough. I am a Venetian. We invented patience. Klaus grunted. He did not like waiting. He did not like London, with its crowds and its noise and its constant smell of smoke. He missed the sea. He missed the wind. He missed the simple, clean terror of a storm, which was at least honest about its intentions. 3 days, he said. Not a day more. Bjorn spent the 3 days repairing the ship. The bowsprit had been replaced, not with a proper spar, but with a temporary one, cut from a pine log that Matteo had purchased from a timber merchant near the tower. It would hold for the voyage to Southampton, perhaps even to Bordeaux. But it would need to be replaced properly with oak when they reached a port that had a shipwright who knew what he was doing. The hull seam that Thomas had caulked was holding, but Bjorn checked it anyway. He climbed into the hold, lit a lantern, and inspected every inch of the interior planking. The wood was wet. It was always wet. But there were no new leaks, no fresh rot, no signs of the ship's slow decay. A ship dies from the inside. Bjorn had seen it happen. The wood rots around the iron nails, the nails rust, the rust eats the wood, and one day the whole thing comes apart in a moderate swell. The sea wolf was not there yet. She had another 5 years, maybe 10, if they treated her well, but she was aging like all things, and Bjorn knew that one day he would have to say goodbye to her. He did not think about that day. He did not think about anything except the next knot, the next rope, the next sail. On the 3rd day, Matteo found his buyer. He was a knight, Sir Geoffrey de la Pole, a minor noble with a manor in Essex and a taste for foreign luxuries. He had seen Samite silk once in Calais at the wedding of a French count, and he had wanted it ever since. Now he wanted it enough to pay. How much? Matteo asked, in the back room of a tavern near the Guildhall. £30, Sir Geoffrey said. Matteo laughed. He did not mean to laugh. It was bad negotiation practice to show emotion, but the number was so absurdly low that his body reacted before his mind could stop it. £30 for silk that traveled from Tabriz to Novgorod to Lubeck to London? £30 for silk that was woven by the daughters of the great Khan? £30 for silk that will outlive your grandchildren? Matteo shook his head. £100, not a penny less. 50, 90, 60. And I will introduce you to the Earl of Warwick, who is looking for a merchant to supply his household with spices. Matteo paused. The Earl of Warwick was one of the richest men in England. A contract with his household would be worth hundreds of pounds, perhaps thousands, over the course of a year. The introduction alone was worth more than the silk. £70, Matteo said, and the introduction. Done. They shook hands. Matteo wrote the terms on a scrap of parchment, and both men signed it with their marks. Sir Geoffrey with a seal ring, Matteo with his name in a careful Venetian hand. The silk was sold. The voyage was profitable. Everything was as it should be. And yet, walking back to the ship, Matteo felt a coldness in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the feeling of things going too well. The sea, the merchants, the world. They did not allow smooth sailing for long. Something would go wrong. It always did. He just did not know what or when. Southampton and the Channel. The voyage from London to Southampton should have been easy. The south coast of England is not the North Sea. The Isle of Wight shelters the Solent, and the Solent shelters Southampton water, and by the time a ship reaches the city's quays, she has forgotten what a real wave feels like. But the wind did not cooperate. It died completely off Beachy Head, leaving the Sea Wolf becalmed for an entire day, her sail hanging limp as a dead tongue. The crew sat on the deck, sweating in their wool tunics, watching the water turn to glass. A calm was its own kind of storm, the kind that tested patience instead of courage. "I could swim to shore faster than this," Eric muttered. He had stripped to his breeches and was lying on the deck like a beached seal, his pale skin already turning pink in the spring sun. "Then swim," Klaus said. "I will tell your family you drowned heroically." "My family would believe it. I am not a good swimmer." Bjorn sat in the bow, mending a net. The net was not for fishing, not primarily, but for catching anything that fell overboard. He had used it twice in his career. Once for a barrel of wine, once for a sailor who had been luckier than Jan. The net had holes in it, and he was weaving new twine through the old, his fingers moving in a rhythm that had no need of his attention. Jan sat beside him, watching. The boy had recovered from the storm, though his hands still trembled sometimes, and he woke in the night with shouts that faded into embarrassed silence. He had not spoken of the drowning. Bjorn had not asked. "Why do you stay?" Jan asked suddenly. "You could be a shipwright. Your father was a shipwright. You know wood. You know rope. You could live on land." Bjorn considered the question. It was the same question he had asked himself 100 times on 100 nights. He had never found an answer that satisfied him. "Shipwrights build ships," he said. "Sailors sail them. The builder watches the ship leave, the sailor watches the shore leave. I prefer to be the one who moves." "But you could move on land. You could be a merchant's factor. You could travel with a cart. You would still move." "I would move slowly. On a ship, you move with the wind. On land, you move with the horse, and the horse moves with the road, and the road goes where it wants, not where you want." Bjorn tied a knot in the net, tested it, untied it, and tied it again. "The sea has no roads. That is why I love it." Jan frowned. He was young enough to believe that love required a reason. He would learn. The wind returned on the second day, a gentle breeze from the east that pushed the sea wolf past Selseybill and into the Solent. The Isle of Wight appeared on the port side, green and low, with white cliffs that looked like teeth. Bjorn had never been to the Isle of Wight, but he had heard stories. Smugglers, shipwrecks, a monastery that made the best mead in England. He made a mental note to ask about the mead. Southampton rose from the water like a smaller, cleaner London. Its walls were white stone, not gray brick, and its streets were wider, and its smell was more fish than shit. The quay was busy with ships, cogs from the Rhine, carracks from Genoa, a single galley from Venice that made Matteo stand a little straighter when he saw it. "The Falcon of the Lagoon," he said. "I know that ship. She belongs to the Soranzo family. They are competitors." "Should we be worried?" Klaus asked. "No, competitors are not enemies. Enemies steal your cargo and kill your crew. Competitors just try to sell the same goods for a lower price." Matteo smiled, though the smile did not reach his eyes. "But sometimes competitors become enemies. It is a small step." The Sea Wolf docked at the French quay, so named because it was where the wine ships from Bordeaux unloaded their cargo. The smell of wine was everywhere, not fresh wine, but the sour ghost of wine that had been spilled and soaked into the wood of the quay over decades. It mixed with the smell of the sea and the smell of the city, and the result was something that made Bjorn's head spin slightly, though he had not drunk anything. "Cargo," Klaus said. "Unload the English goods, load the French goods. We sail for Bordeaux on the morning tide. What English goods? Bjorn asked. We sold everything in London. We bought new goods. Wool, actually. The English wool that we brought from Lubeck was Flemish wool. Now we are carrying English wool to Bordeaux. The English do not want their own wool. They want to sell it to the French. The French do not want their own wine. They want to sell it to the English. And neither of them wants to talk to each other, so they use us. Klaus shook his head. Merchants are strange. The loading took 2 days, not because the cargo was heavy, but because Matteo insisted on inspecting every bale, every barrel, every crate. He had learned the hard way that English wool merchants sometimes packed their wool with stones to increase the weight, and that French wine merchants sometimes watered their wine before it was barreled. The only way to avoid being cheated was to check everything yourself with your own hands and your own nose. This wool is good, he said, pressing his face into a bale. Smell it. It smells of sheep and spring. Bad wool smells of mold and old hay. Bjorn smelled it. It smelled like sheep. He did not know the difference between good sheep and bad sheep, and he did not care. But he nodded anyway, because Matteo expected it. The wine was easier to check. Matteo had a tool, a hollow brass tube called a wine thief, that he pushed through the bung hole of each barrel. The tube drew up a sample of wine, which Matteo poured into a cup and held to the light. Good wine was clear and red, bad wine was cloudy or brown. This is good, he said after the 20th barrel. Not great, good. The French are keeping the great wine for themselves, but good is enough. The English will not know the difference. The English will know, Klaus said. The English have been drinking French wine for 200 years. They know the difference between a good year and a bad year. They just pretend not to, so they can pay less. Matteo looked at Klaus with new respect. You are a merchant, disguised as a sailor. I am a sailor who has listened to merchants for 30 years. It is the same thing. On the evening of the second day, a man came to the ship. He was not a merchant. He was not a sailor. He was a priest, a Dominican by his black and white habit, with a face that had seen too much and a voice that had been worn smooth by prayer. He stood on the quay, looking up at the sea wolf, and when he saw Matteo on the deck, he made the sign of the cross. God save you, my son, he said. And you, father, Matteo replied. He was not a religious man. Venetian merchants were too practical for that. But he respected the office. Priests could write contracts. Priests could witness signatures. Priests could be useful. I am Father Thomas of the Priory of St. Denis. I have a request. Matteo's expression did not change, but his internal ledger shifted. Requests from priests were rarely profitable. They wanted donations, or passage, or absolution, for sins they had not yet committed. I am listening. There is a sickness in the south, in Italy, in France. They say it comes from the east, from the lands beyond the sea. They say it kills quickly, within days, and that there is no cure. Father Thomas paused. They say it travels on ships. Matteo felt the coldness in his stomach return. He had heard rumors in London, whispers from merchants who had come from Calais and Bruges. Something was happening in the Mediterranean. Something bad. But he had dismissed it as the usual panic, the same panic that accompanied every outbreak of the bloody flux or the sweating sickness. How does it travel on ships? He asked. In the rats? In the fleas? In the breath of the sick? No one knows for certain, but the Archbishop has ordered that all ships arriving from the south be quarantined for 40 days. 40 days on an island in the harbor before anyone is allowed to come ashore. Mateo's mind raced. A 40-day quarantine would destroy a merchant's schedule. It would rot the wine. It would mildew the wool. It would cost more than the cargo was worth. "We are not from the south," he said. "We are from London, from Lubeck, from the north." The Archbishop's order applies to all ships. The sickness moves north, they say. It does not respect borders. Father Thomas spread his hands. "I am not here to enforce quarantine. I am here to warn you. If you sail for Bordeaux, you may find the ports closed. You may find yourself trapped." Klaus had been listening from the tiller. Now he stepped forward, his face hard. "We have a contract. We have a schedule. We cannot wait 40 days for a rumor." "It is not a rumor," Father Thomas said quietly. "It is a prayer. I pray that I am wrong, but I am not often wrong." He left. The crew watched him go, his black and white figure shrinking into the twilight. No one spoke. Even the gulls seemed quiet. That night, Mateo called a meeting in the aft cabin. It was crowded. Klaus, Bjorn, Eric, and Peter, the helmsman, all of them sitting on sea chests and barrels, their faces lit by a single lantern. "We have a decision to make," Mateo said. "The priest says there is a sickness in the south. He says the ports may close. We can sail for Bordeaux as planned, or we can change course. We could go to Ireland, we could go to Scotland. We could go back to Lubeck." "And lose the wine contract," Klaus said. "And the wool. And the profit. The profit is not worth dying for." "Everything is worth dying for? To the right man." Klaus looked around the cabin. "What do the sailors say?" Eric spoke first. "I have sailed into plague ports before. In the Baltic, when the Black Death came to revel, the city closed its gates, the ships rotted at anchor, the sailors died on their decks, and no one came to bury them." He paused. "I do not want to do that again." Peter nodded. "I have a wife in Friesland. I want to see her again. I say we go north." Thomas said nothing. He was young, and he had never seen plague, and he did not know what to say. Bjorn looked at Mateo. "What do you want?" Mateo was silent for a long moment. He was not a brave man. He knew that about himself. He was a careful man, a calculating man, a man who weighed risks against rewards and never bet more than he could lose. But he was also a man who had silk from Tabriz, and wool from England, and wine from France, and a ledger full of numbers that added up to something like a future. "I want to go to Bordeaux," he said, "not because of the profit, because if we run from every rumor, we will never get anywhere. The sea is full of dangers. Plague is just one more." "It is not just one more," Eric said. "It is the one that does not end. All things end. The sea, the sky, the plague, even the world, they say, will end someday." Mateo picked up his ledger book, held it to his chest. "But not today. Tomorrow we sail for Bordeaux." No one argued. Sailors did not argue with the man who paid their wages. But Bjorn saw the fear in their eyes, the same fear he felt in his own chest. It was not the fear of storms or pirates or drowning. It was the fear of something small, something invisible, something that could slip through your fingers and into your lungs and turn your blood to poison. He tried not to think about it. He thought about the rope instead. The rope was solid. The rope was real. The rope would not kill you unless you tied it wrong. They sailed at dawn. The wind was fair, a steady breeze from the northwest that pushed the sea wolf out of the Solent and into the English Channel. The channel was busier than the North Sea. Ships everywhere, heading east and west, carrying wool and wine and tin and salt and 1,000 other things that made the world turn. Bjorn stood at the bow, watching the French coast appear on the horizon. It was low and gray, like the English coast, but different somehow. The light was different. The air was different. He could not explain it, but he knew it in his bones. He was leaving England, and he was entering something else. Jan came to the bow, carrying a piece of hardtack. He offered half to Bjorn, who took it and chewed. The hardtack was old, baked months ago in Lübeck, and it tasted of flour and thyme and the faintest hint of weevil. "Do you think the priest was lying?" Jan asked. "I think priests do not lie. They just tell the truth in a way that makes you want to give them money." "Is the plague real?" Bjorn thought about it. He had seen sickness before, the bloody flux that had killed 3 men on a voyage to Reval, the sweating sickness that had emptied a village near Hamburg, the cough that had taken his mother when he was 9. But he had never seen a plague that traveled from the east, that killed in days, that made ports. "Yes," he said, "I think it is real. I think it is coming. But I do not know when or where or how bad. So we sail toward it. So we sail toward everything. That is what sailors do." They passed the island of Alderney on the 2nd day, and the coast of Normandy on the 3rd. The wind held steady, and the Sea Wolf made good time, her bow cutting through the channel like a knife through butter. Bjorn checked the rigging twice a day, replaced a worn shroud, tightened a loose stay. The ship was happy. The sea was calm. The crew was almost relaxed. But on the 4th day, they saw the wreck. It was a cog, or what was left of one. The mast was gone, snapped off a few feet above the deck. The hull was blackened, as if by fire. The ship lay on its side in the shallows, half a mile from the shore, and the gulls circled above it like mourners at a funeral. "Pirates," Klaus said. His voice was flat. He had seen wrecks before. They all had. "Or fire," Matteo said, "or both. Pirates sometimes burn the ships they cannot carry." Bjorn looked at the wreck and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The ship had been a cog like the Sea Wolf. It had carried a crew like the Sea Wolf. It had sailed from some port to some other port with some cargo that was now at the bottom of the sea. "Do we stop?" he asked. "No," Klaus said. "There is nothing we can do. The crew is dead or gone. The cargo is gone. We sail on." They sailed on. But Bjorn did not take his eyes off the wreck until it was a speck, and then a memory, and then nothing. Bordeaux and the first signs. The Gironde estuary is the mouth of a giant. It swallows the Garonne and the Dordogne and vomits them into the Bay of Biscay, and the water there is neither fresh nor salt, but something in between, brackish, brown, and full of silt that clings to the hull like a second skin. The Sea Wolf entered the Gironde on the 5th day out of Southampton, the wind behind her, the tide pulling her forward, and the smell of wine so thick in the air that Bjorn felt drunk just breathing. Bordeaux lay 50 miles upriver, 50 miles of winding channel, of sandbars and shallows, of small islands where fishermen lived in huts made of driftwood and hope. It would take 2 days to cover that distance, even with the tide. The river did not forgive haste. It had eaten ships that tried. Klaus stood at the bow, a sounding pole in his hands. He lowered it every few minutes, feeling for the bottom. 12 feet, he called. 11 feet, 10 feet. Deeper again, the channel moves, always moves. The river is alive, Matteo said. He was standing near the mast, his ledger book tucked away for once. He had not written in it since they passed the wreck. In Venice, we say the rivers are the veins of the earth. The sea is the heart. The rivers carry the blood to the cities. In Lübeck, we say a river is a road that moves. You cannot build a road that moves. That is why we prefer the sea. The sea moves too. The sea moves in one place, the river moves in another. I am a sailor, not a philosopher. Klaus pulled up the sounding pole, checked the mud on the end, and lowered it again. 9 feet. We are fine. The sea wolf draws 6. Bjorn was at the tiller, his hands steady on the whipstaff. Peter stood beside him, reading the water, the way the surface swirled, the way the light reflected off the shallows. A good helmsman could see the depth in the color of the water. Dark blue was deep. Green was shallow. Brown was the bottom trying to reach up and grab you. There, Peter said, pointing to a patch of brownish green. Stay to port of that. Bjorn adjusted the tiller. The sea wolf turned 2 points to the left, her bow cutting a new path through the brown water. The patch passed to starboard, harmless. The river grumbled beneath them, but did not bite. They spent the first night on the river, anchored in a sheltered bend near the village of Blay. The village was small, 12 houses, a church, a wharf, where local fishermen sold their catch. No one came to greet them. The villagers watched from a distance, their faces hidden in the twilight. And Bjorn had the uncomfortable feeling that they were not welcome. Strangers, Eric said. They fear strangers. Or they fear the plague, Matteo said. He was sitting on the deck, eating a piece of hardtack soaked in wine to soften it. By now the rumors have reached every village between here and Paris. Every stranger is a potential carrier. Every ship is a potential coffin. We are not carriers. We have been at sea for weeks. If any of us had the plague, we would be dead already. The villagers do not know that, and even if they did, they would not believe it. Fear is stronger than reason. Fear is stronger than anything. Matteo chewed his hardtack, swallowed, grimaced. Fear is the one cargo that never loses its value. They posted watches that night. 2 men on deck, armed with crossbows, watching the river for pirates or desperate men or nothing at all. Bjorn took the first watch from sunset to midnight. The stars came out, reflected in the water, and the frogs sang from the banks, and the world felt almost peaceful. But he did not sleep when his watch ended. He lay on the deck, wrapped in his cloak, and listened to the river. The river talked differently from the sea. The sea roared and shrieked and whispered. The river chuckled. It was a low, wet sound, like a man laughing at a joke no one else understood. You are going to Bordeaux, the river seemed to say. You are going to die. He told himself it was just the water on the hull. He almost believed it. They reached Bordeaux on the second afternoon. The city rose from the river like a dream of stone. Tall houses with slate roofs, church spires that pierced the sky. A cathedral so large it seemed to have been built by giants. The quays were wide and busy, or they had been busy. Now many of the ships were gone. The ones that remained sat low in the water, their decks empty, their ropes trailing in the current like dead hair. What happened here? Jan whispered. No one answered, but they all saw the same thing. The city was afraid. The The Sea-Wolf found a berth at the Quai de Chartrons, the wine port where the barrels of claret were loaded onto ships, bound for England and Ireland and the Low Countries, but the quay was nearly empty. A few dock workers sat on bales of straw, smoking pipes, their faces blank. A customs official came to meet them, a thin man in a blue tunic, wearing a mask over his nose and mouth. "State your business," the official said. His voice was muffled by the mask, but his eyes were sharp. "We are merchants from Lubeck, via London and Southampton," Matteo said. "We carry English wool to sell, and we seek wine to carry back." The official shook his head. "No one is buying wine. No one is selling wine. The city is closed. The port is closed. You should not have come." "Closed? But we have a contract. Your contract is worth nothing. The plague is here." The official gestured to the empty quay. 2 weeks ago, a ship from Marseille arrived. She carried silk and spices and death. Within 3 days, half the crew was dead. Within a week, the sickness was in the city. Now people die in the streets. The churches are full of bodies waiting for burial. The grave diggers work day and night, and still they fall behind. Matteo went pale. Bjorn had never seen him pale before. The merchant's face was usually a mask, carefully controlled, revealing nothing. But now the mask slipped, and underneath was a man who was very, very afraid. "We have to leave," Klaus said, "now before the sickness finds us." "Where will you go?" the official asked. "The English ports are closed to ships from France. The Spanish ports are worse than here. The Portuguese will sink you before they let you land. You are trapped, my friend? We are all trapped." They did not leave. They could not. The tide was against them, and the wind had died, and the Sea-Wolf was stuck in Bordeaux until the river decided to let her go. Matteo went ashore to find the wine merchant he'd contracted with. He wore a cloth over his nose and mouth, like the customs official, and he carried a small bag of silver in case the merchant tried to renegotiate. He did not take Bjorn with him. He went alone. Bjorn stayed on the ship. He checked the rigging. He checked the hull. He checked the cargo. He did everything he had done 100 times before, but his hands moved without his mind, and his mind was somewhere else, wandering the streets of Bordeaux, imagining the bodies, the smell, the sound of the death carts rumbling over the cobblestones. He had never seen plague, but he had heard stories. His father had told him about the plague that came to Visby in 1315 when the ships from the east brought something worse than rats. "The skin turns black," his father had said. "The flesh rots while the man is still alive. You can smell them before you see them. You can smell them from 100 paces." Bjorn tried not to think about it. He thought about the rope instead. Matteo returned at dusk. His face was gray beneath the cloth, and his hands were shaking. "He is dead," he said. "The wine merchant. Dead. His wife is dead. His children, 3 of them, are dead. The house is sealed. The neighbors threw rocks at me when I knocked on the door." He sat down on a coil of rope, put his head in his hands. "There is no wine. There is no contract. There is nothing." "Then we leave," Klaus said. "We take the wool and we find another port. Lisbon, Porto, somewhere the plague has not reached." "The plague has reached everywhere. It is like the sea. It has no borders." Matteo looked up. His eyes were red. "I have lost everything." "The silk is sold, yes, but the profit from the silk was going to buy the wine. The wine was going to buy the next cargo. The next cargo was going to buy the ship. I had a plan, a 5-year plan. And now we survive," Klaus said. "That is the plan. survive. That night, the first man from Bordeaux came to the ship. He was a sailor, or had been. His clothes were torn, his face was hollow, and his eyes had the wild look of a man who had seen too much and slept too little. He stood on the quay, looking up at the sea wolf, and when he saw Bjorn on the deck, he raised a hand. "Please," he said, "please take me with you. I will work. I will do anything. Just take me away from this place." Bjorn went to Klaus. Klaus went to Matteo. Matteo stood at the rail, looking down at the man, and for a long moment he said nothing. "Where is your ship?" Matteo asked. "Gone. The captain sailed without me. He left me on the quay because I was not there when the tide turned. I was helping a friend. A dying friend." The captain did not wait. "Can you sail?" "I was a sailor for 20 years. I know every rope on every ship. I know the tides of this river better than I know my own name. Please." Matteo looked at Klaus. Klaus shrugged. "We need men. Eric wants to go home. Thomas is talking about becoming a monk. Jan is a boy. We need men." "Then he comes?" Matteo said. "But he stays on the deck for 3 days. If he shows any sign of sickness, any sign at all, he goes overboard. I am sorry, but I will not let the plague onto this ship." The man climbed aboard. His name was Gaston, and he was from La Rochelle, and he had hands that knew ropes and eyes that knew fear. Bjorn gave him a blanket and a cup of wine, and Gaston sat in the bow, wrapped in the wool, watching the city die. "They are burning the bodies now," he said. "The priests say it is the only way to stop the sickness, but the fire does not stop it. The fire just makes the smell worse." "How many dead?" Bjorn asked. "No one knows. Hundreds, thousands. The count stops mattering after the first 100. You just stop counting. You stop thinking. You stop feeling." Gaston drank the wine, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I watched my wife die. I watched my children die. I watched my neighbor die, and his wife, and his children, and his dog. Even the dog. The dog got the lumps under its skin, just like the people. Nothing is safe." Bjorn sat beside him, saying nothing. There was nothing to say. Words were ropes that could not hold against a storm like this. On the 3rd day in Bordeaux, the wind returned. It came from the east, a dry wind that carried the smell of smoke from the funeral pyres. The Sea Wolf raised her sail, hauled her anchor, and began the slow journey down the Gironde back toward the sea. The river was the same as before, brown, shallow, full of hidden sandbars, but everything else had changed. Matteo stood at the stern watching Bordeaux shrink. He had not found wine, he had not found anything. The wool was still in the hold, and the wool was worth less than the cost of carrying it, because no one wanted to buy wool from a ship that had been to Bordeaux. The plague had devalued everything it touched. It was the worst merchant of all. It bought for nothing and sold for everything. "We go to Lisbon," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Portugal is not yet closed. The Portuguese are stubborn. They will trade until the ships stop coming." "And if Lisbon is closed," Klaus asked, "then we go to the Canary Islands, or to Morocco, or to the edge of the world. The sea is large. There is always another port." Bjorn heard this and wondered if Matteo believed it. He wondered if any of them believed anything anymore. The Bay of Biscay is the worst sea in Europe. The Romans called it Sinus Aquitanicus, the Aquitanian Gulf, and they avoided it whenever they could. The waves come from the west, from the Atlantic, from the open ocean where nothing stops them until they hit the coast of France. The sea wolf entered the bay on a gray morning with the wind on her stern and the rain on her decks. And within an hour, every man on board was wishing he was somewhere else. "Hold the tiller," Klaus shouted to Peter. "Hold it steady. Do not let her broach." Peter held. His arms were thick as hawsers, his face set in stone. The sea wolf rose and fell, each wave lifting her stern and pushing her forward like a hand on the back of a running child. Bjorn was in the hold, checking the lashings. The wool bales had shifted, and one of them had broken free, rolling across the floor with the motion of the ship. He chased it, caught it, tied it back to the ring bolt. His hands were wet with sweat and pitch. His head banged against a deck beam. He did not feel it. There was too much else to feel. "Bjorn!" John's voice from above. "Bjorn, come up, there is a ship!" He climbed the ladder, emerged onto the deck, and saw it. A carrack, larger than a cog, with 3 masts and a high forecastle, was bearing down on them from the west. She flew no flag. Her sails were dark with age and weather, and she was turning toward the sea wolf, her bow cutting through the waves like a knife. "Pirates," Klaus said. His voice was calm. He had faced pirates before, or privateers. It does not matter. They are not friends. "Can we outrun them?" Matteo asked. "No, she is faster than us. Heavier, but faster. She has more sail. She has more men. We fight, or we surrender." "Sailors do not surrender. Sailors do what they must." Klaus turned to the crew. "Crossbows on the rail, axes on the deck. Jan, get the boiling oil." "We do not have boiling oil." "Then get the wine. Wine is flammable. Wine burns. The French make it strong enough to burn. Trust me." The carrack came closer. Bjorn could see the men on her deck now, 30 of them, maybe 40, armed with swords and crossbows and the long, hooked pikes that pirates used to pull enemy ships close. He could see their faces, bearded, scarred, hungry. Men who had not eaten well in weeks. Men who had nothing to lose. "Steady," Klaus said. "Hold your fire until they are close, then aim for the helmsman. If we kill the helmsman, she will lose control. The wind will push her past us." Bjorn raised his crossbow. His arms were steady, his breathing slow. He had never killed a man before. He had come close, in the Skagerrak, in the Channel, in a dozen fights that had ended before they began. But he had never actually taken a life. He wondered what it would feel like. He wondered if he would care. The carrack was 100 yards away. 50. 20. "Now," Klaus said. Bjorn fired. His bolt flew straight, struck the helmsman in the shoulder, and the man fell. The carrack's tiller swung free, and the ship turned, her bow swinging away from the sea wolf. But it was not enough. The 2 ships were too close. The carrack's hull scraped against the sea wolf's side, and the pirates threw their grappling hooks, and the fight began. Bjorn dropped the crossbow and picked up an axe. A pirate swung onto the deck, a big man with a red beard and a sword. Bjorn swung the axe. The pirate blocked with his sword, but the axe was heavier, and the force of the blow drove the pirate back. Bjorn swung again, and this time the axe bit into the man's shoulder, and the man screamed, and Bjorn felt the warm spray of blood on his face. He did not stop. He could not stop. He swung, and the world became a blur of steel and wood, and the wet, meaty sounds of men dying. Beside him, Jan fought with a knife. The boy was screaming, not in fear, but in rage. He stabbed a pirate in the belly, pulled the knife out. stabbed again. His face was splattered with blood. His eyes were wide and wild. Eric swung his axe like a man threshing wheat. Each blow felled a pirate. Each blow was accompanied by a grunt, a curse, a prayer to Thor or Odin or whoever was listening. Klaus stood at the tiller, a sword in one hand, his other hand gripping the wood. He did not fight. He commanded. To the bow, to the bow. They are trying to board from the bow. Peter left the tiller, grabbed a crossbow, shot a pirate through the throat. The man fell, gurgling, and Peter picked up the dead man's sword and charged into the fray. And Matteo Contarini, the merchant, the man who had never touched a rope. Matteo stood at the rail with a barrel of wine, pouring it onto the deck of the carrack. Then he took a lantern, lit the wine, and the carrack's deck became a field of fire. The pirates screamed. Their clothes burned, their hair burned, their ship burned. They jumped into the sea, and the sea did not welcome them. It was cold. It was deep, and it was full of waves that did not care about fire or pain or death. The carrack drifted away, burning, her sails blackened, her hull crackling. The sea-wolf was free. After the battle, they counted 3 pirates dead on the deck, 2 more in the water, drowning or dead. The rest had fled, those who could, back to their burning ship. The sea-wolf had lost no one. Jan had a cut on his arm, shallow, bleeding, but not dangerous. Eric had a bruise on his head, purple and swelling. Bjorn had blood on his hands and face, but none of it was his. "Clean the decks," Klaus said. "Throw the bodies overboard. The sharks will take them." "Should we say a prayer?" John asked. His voice was shaking. "You can pray if you want. The sharks will not wait." They threw the bodies into the sea. 3 dead pirates, their faces already turning gray, their eyes open, staring at nothing. Bjorn watched them sink. Watched the water turn red, watched the red fade to nothing. He had killed a man. He had killed a man and felt nothing except the need to kill the next man and the next and the next. He sat down on the deck, put his head in his hands, and vomited. Matteo sat beside him silent. He did not offer comfort. He did not offer advice. He just sat, and after a while he put a hand on Bjorn's shoulder, and that was enough. Lisbon and the long goodbye. The Bay of Biscay did not forgive the battle. It had watched the sea wolf spill blood on its waters, and now it demanded its own price. The wind turned against them, blowing from the southwest, driving waves that broke over the bow and filled the air with salt and spray. The ship staggered westward like a wounded animal, her mast creaking, her hull groaning, her crew too exhausted to curse. Bjorn had not slept since the fight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the red-bearded pirate's face. The way the man's eyes had widened when the axe bit into his shoulder. The way his mouth had opened, not in a scream but in a question, why? As if he had not expected to die. As if any man on any ship ever expected to die. Jan pushed a piece of hardtack into Bjorn's hand. The boy's arm was bandaged with a strip of torn sailcloth, the blood already dried to a brown stain. He looked older than he had a week ago. They all looked older. "I am not hungry. Eat anyway. Klaus says we must keep our strength. The bay is not done with us." Bjorn ate. The hardtack was like chewing on a stone, but he chewed and swallowed, and after a while his stomach stopped complaining. He drank water from the barrel, warm, brackish, tasting of wood, and felt something like life return to his limbs. "Did you kill anyone?" he asked Jan. Jan was silent for a long moment, then, "Yes, The man with the knife. The one who tried to climb over the rail. I stabbed him in the neck. How did it feel? I do not know. I was not feeling. I was just doing. John looked at his hands. They were steady. Is that wrong? To not feel? I do not know. I am asking you. They sat in silence. The waves broke against the bow. The ship rose and fell. Somewhere to the south beyond the gray horizon lay Portugal. Or death, or both. Gaston, the sailor they had picked up in Bordeaux, proved his worth in the bay. He knew the currents, the winds, the hidden dangers that the northern sailors did not understand. He stood at the bow with a lead line calling out depths. And when Klaus asked him how he knew where the sandbars lay, he shrugged. I grew up here. The bay is my mother. She is angry, but she is not cruel. She just wants us to respect her. She tried to kill us yesterday. That was not the bay. That was the pirates. The bay does not care about pirates. Pirates are like flies to her. Annoying, but small. Gaston spat into the water. The bay cares about the tide. The tide is her heartbeat. If you do not dance with the tide, she steps on your feet. Bjorn listened to Gaston and thought about what it meant to know a sea. He knew the Baltic. He knew its moods, its secrets, the way the ice formed in winter and the way the herring ran in spring. But the bay was a stranger. He was a guest here, and guests did not outstay their welcome. They rounded Cape Finisterre on the 4th day after the battle. The cape was a finger of rock pointing into the Atlantic, white with bird shit and old stories. The Romans had called it Finis Terrae, the end of the earth, because they did not know what lay beyond. Now every sailor knew. Beyond lay the ocean, the great deep, the place where the maps stopped and the imagination began. Portugal in 3 days, Gaston said, if the wind holds. The wind held. It shifted to the north, cool and steady, pushing the Seawolf down the coast of Portugal. They passed the port of Porto on a sunny morning, the city's terraced houses climbing the hills like white grapes. Porto was not closed. Ships moved in and out of its harbor, and the flags flew from the castle, and the church bells rang for mass. But there was something in the air, a tension, a stillness, that reminded Bjorn of the moments before a storm. Do we stop? Klaus asked. No, Matteo said. Lisbon is larger. Lisbon has more buyers. Lisbon is where the money lives. Lisbon is also closer to the plague. Everything is closer to the plague. The plague is not a place. It is a traveler, like us. They reached the Tagus estuary. On the morning of the 7th day, the river was wide here, wider than the Gironde, so wide that the far shore was a haze. Lisbon sat on the north bank, a city of white stone and red roofs, dominated by the castle of São Jorge on its hill and the cathedral of Santa Maria in the valley. The harbor was full of ships, cogs from England, carracks from Genoa, galleys from Venice, even a few cogs from the Hanseatic cities, flying the flags of Lübeck and Hamburg and Bremen. We are not the first, Matteo said. Look, the north has come to Lisbon. The Seawolf found a berth near the Ribeira, the main quay where the merchants of Lisbon gathered to buy and sell the goods of 3 continents. The customs officials came aboard, but they did not wear masks. The plague had not yet reached Lisbon. The city was still healthy, still trading, still pretending that the world was not burning. State your business, the official said. He was a fat man with a gold chain and a bored expression. We have English wool for sale. We seek wine, olive oil, cork, and, if possible, salt cod. Salt cod you can find, wine you can find. Olive oil is expensive this season. The harvest was poor. The cork is plentiful. The trees do not care about the weather. The official stamped a paper with his seal. You have 7 days. After that, you must renew your permit. The king is worried about the plague. He may close the port at any time. Then we will not waste a single day. Lisbon was not like London. It was not like Lubeck. It was not like any city Bjorn had seen. The streets were narrow and winding, paved with stone that had been worn smooth by 1,000 years of feet. The houses had balconies of wrought iron, and the windows were shuttered against the sun, and the air smelled of lemons and fish and something else, something sweet and unfamiliar, like flowers that grew only in warm places. Bjorn walked the streets with Jan, carrying a sample of the wool to a merchant who had expressed interest. The merchant's shop was near the cathedral, a dark space full of bolts of cloth and the sound of coins being counted. The merchant, a Jew named Isaac with a long beard and eyes that had seen everything, examined the wool with his fingers, his nose, his teeth. "English," he said. "Good English, not the best. The best English wool goes to Flanders. This is the second best. But second best is still good. Matteo Contarini sends his regards. He says the price is negotiable." Everyone says the price is negotiable. No one means it. Isaac named a price. Bjorn pretended to consider it. Isaac raised the price by a fraction. Bjorn pretended to accept. The deal was done in less than an hour, and Bjorn walked out of the shop with a bag of silver and the feeling that he had just been outsmarted by a man who had been outsmarting people since before Bjorn was born. "Did we get a good price?" Jan asked. "I have no idea. Matteo will know. Matteo knows everything." Matteo did know. He looked at the silver, weighed it in his hand, bit a coin to test its purity, and nodded. "Good, not great, but good. Isaac is honest, as merchants go. He takes his profit, but he does not cheat. In Lisbon, that is rare. We could have gotten more in London," Klaus said. "In London, we would have gotten more, but we are not in London. We are in Lisbon, and the wool is sold, and we have silver to buy wine and oil and cork. That is the merchant's life. You take what you can get, where you can get it, and you do not complain about what might have been." Klaus grunted. He was not a complainer. He was a sailor. Sailors complained about the wind, the waves, the food, the pay, the captain, the ship, and each other. But they did not complain about the price of wool. That was merchants' work. The loading took 4 days. The wine came from the Douro Valley, brought down river in flat-bottomed boats, and transferred to the Sea Wolf in barrels that smelled of oak and grapes. The olive oil came in amphorae, tall clay jars sealed with pitch, each one weighing as much as a man. The cork came in bales, light as air, taking up space without weight. And the salt cod, the precious, stinking, life-saving salt cod, came in flat wooden boxes, stacked in the hold like bricks. Gaston helped with the loading. He had found his sea legs again, and his hands moved with the confidence of a man who had done this work 1,000 times. But Bjorn noticed that Gaston did not go ashore. He stayed on the ship, eating his meals alone, speaking only when spoken to. "Why do you not go into the city?" Bjorn asked him. "It is not like Bordeaux. There is no plague here. Not yet." Gaston looked at the city, at the white houses and the red roofs and the castle on the hill. "I went ashore yesterday. I walked to the cathedral. I lit a candle for my wife, for my children, for my friends. And then I came back. I do not need to see the rest. The rest is just walls and people. People who are still alive. I do not know how to talk to people who are still alive. Pretend. That is what I do. You pretend well? Better than most? Bjorn sat down beside Gaston, his back against the mast. I pretend that I am not afraid. I pretend that I do not miss my father. I pretend that the sea is not trying to kill me every day. It is exhausting. But it works. Gaston laughed. It was the first time Bjorn had heard him laugh. It was a small sound, dry and sad, like a leaf blowing across a grave. Pretending. Yes, I can pretend. I have been pretending for weeks that I am still a man. Maybe I can pretend a little longer. On the 5th day in Lisbon, the first sign of trouble came. A ship arrived from Seville. She was a carrack, larger than the Sea Wolf, and she flew the flag of Castile, but her crew did not wave, they did not shout. They stood at the rail, pale-faced and silent. And when the customs officials came aboard, they found 7 dead men in the hold. The plague had reached Seville. Now it had reached Lisbon. The city reacted quickly. The port was closed, not entirely, but strictly. All ships arriving from the south were quarantined for 40 days. The Sea Wolf was not from the south, but she had been in Lisbon for 5 days, and that was enough. The officials ordered her to move to an anchorage downriver, near the village of Belém, where she would wait with the other ships until the city decided what to do. "We are trapped," Matteo said. His voice was calm, but his hands were not. Again, trapped in a port that will soon be full of plague. "Not necessarily," Klaus said. "The quarantine may work. If they keep the sick ships away from the city, the plague may not spread. The plague always spreads. It is like a rumor. It finds a way." Matteo walked to the rail, looked at the city. "We have to leave. Tonight. Before they close the river." "Leave? Where?" "The wind is against us. The tide is wrong. And even if we could leave, where would we go? South, to Morocco, to the Canary Islands, to anywhere that is not here. And if the plague is already there, then we keep going. We keep going until we find a place that is safe. Or until we run out of water. Or until we run out of hope." Matteo turned to face Klaus. "I am not going to die in Lisbon. I am not going to die in a plague city with a ledger book in my hand and nothing in my belly. I am going to die at sea or not at all." Klaus looked at Matteo for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tonight, after midnight, we will slip the anchor and drift downriver with the tide. If we are quiet, they may not notice until morning." They prepared the ship in silence. No shouting, no running, no sudden movements. The crew worked by feel, by memory, by the light of a single shielded lantern. Bjorn checked the rigging. Jan checked the lashings. Eric and Tomas hauled the anchor, not raising it but loosening it so that it would hold against a gentle pull but release when they were ready. Gaston stood at the tiller. He knew the Tagus better than anyone. He knew the currents, the eddies, the places where the river ran deep and silent. He would guide them through the darkness. Midnight came. The moon was new, the sky black, the stars hidden behind a thin layer of cloud. The Sea Wolf was a shadow among shadows, her hull dark against the dark water. "Now," Klaus whispered. The anchor came up hand over hand, slow and silent. The sail rose just a little, just enough to catch the faint breeze from the north. The ship began to move, not fast, not loud, but moving. Drifting, sliding down the Tagus like a ghost. Bjorn stood at the bow, listening. He heard the water against the hull. He heard the creak of the rigging. He heard the distant sound of a dog barking in the city. He did not hear any shouts, any alarms, any signs that they had been seen. They passed Belem. They passed the tower that guarded the river. They passed the last of the anchored ships, dark and silent, their crews sleeping. And then they were in the estuary, the water widening around them, the sea somewhere ahead. "We are out," Jan whispered. His voice was full of wonder. "We are actually out." "We are not out," Klaus said. "We are just not in. There is a difference." Dawn found them in the Atlantic, the coast of Portugal, a thin line on the eastern horizon. The wind had shifted again, coming from the southeast now, pushing them toward Morocco or toward nothing. Matteo stood at the stern, a compass in his hand, a new instrument, expensive, with a needle that pointed north no matter how the ship turned. "Southwest," he said. "We go southwest toward the Canaries, toward the open sea." "And if we miss the Canaries?" Klaus asked. "Then we miss them. The sea is large." "We will find something. We always find something." Bjorn listened to this and thought about what it meant to trust a man with a compass and a dream. Matteo was not a navigator. He was a merchant. He knew prices, not stars. He knew contracts, not currents. But he was the one who had gotten them out of Lisbon, and that counted for something. Gaston came to the bow, stood beside Bjorn, and pointed to the south. "There is a place I have heard of. An island. Madeira, they call it. Portuguese. Green as Ireland. No plague, not yet. Have you been there?" "No, but I have talked to men who have. They say the wine is good, the women are beautiful, and the sea is kinder than the bay." "Sounds like a story." "All places sound like stories until you see them. Then they sound like memories." Gaston looked at Bjorn. "You are young. You have time for stories. I am old. I have time only for memories." They sailed for 3 days without seeing land. The wind held steady from the southeast, warm and dry, carrying the smell of Africa. The sea was blue, not the gray of the Baltic or the green of the Channel, but a deep, impossible blue, like the inside of a sapphire. Bjorn had never seen water that color. He had never imagined water that color. On the 3rd day, they saw birds. Gulls, but not the gulls of the north. These were smaller, faster, with brown wings and sharp cries. They circled the ship, dove into the water, came up with fish in their beaks. "Land is near," Gaston said. "The birds do not go far from land." "How near?" "A day, maybe less." They sailed through the night, and in the morning they saw it. A mountain rising from the sea, green and steep, with clouds wrapped around its peak like a turban. Madeira, the island of stories. Matteo stood at the bow, his spyglass to his eye. "There is a harbor. On the south side. I can see ships, small ships, fishing boats." He lowered the spyglass. "I can see people. They are waving." The Seawolf sailed into the harbor of Funchal, and for the first time in weeks, Bjorn felt something like hope. But hope is a cargo that spoils quickly. They had been in Funchal for 2 days when Jan fell ill. It started with a headache, just a headache, nothing more. Jan said he had slept badly, that the heat was too much, that he needed water. Bjorn gave him water. Jan drank, thanked him, and went back to his blanket on the deck. By evening, Jan was shaking. His teeth chattered. His skin was hot to the touch. He vomited twice, then a 3rd time, and the 3rd time there was blood in it. "No," Bjorn said. He knelt beside Jan, put a hand on the boy's forehead. The heat was intense, like a fever that had been burning for days, though it had only been hours. No, not him, not Jan. Klaus came, Matteo came. Gaston came. They stood around the boy, looking down at him, and none of them said what they were thinking. They did not need to. They all knew. The plague had found them. The island of no return. The harbor of Funchal was shaped like a crescent moon, its beaches black sand, its hills green with vineyards and sugar cane. The Sea Wolf had anchored in the outer roadstead away from the fishing boats and the small coasters that traded between the islands. Klaus had insisted on it. If the plague is on board, we do not bring it to shore. Now that decision felt like prophecy. John lay on a blanket in the aft cabin, the only enclosed space on the ship. The cabin had been Matteo's domain, but Matteo had given it up without argument. He needs shelter, the merchant had said. The wind will kill him faster than the fever. Bjorn had carried Jan inside, the boy's body light as a bundle of sticks, his breath shallow and fast. The cabin was dark. The shutters were closed to keep out the sun, but the heat leaked through the wooden walls, and the air was thick with the smell of sickness, sweat, vomit, and something else, something sweet and rotten that Bjorn remembered from his mother's last days. Water, Jan whispered. His lips were cracked, his eyes were closed. Bjorn gave him water, a leather cup, held to the boy's mouth, tilted slowly so he would not choke. Jan drank, coughed, drank again. Then he turned his head and vomited onto the blanket, not blood this time, but bile, yellow and foul. We need to wash the blanket, Bjorn said. We need to wash everything. The sickness lives in the cloth, my father told me. Klaus stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. Your father was a shipwright, not a physician. He knew things. He had seen plague before, in Visby, when the ships from the east. I know what happened in Visby. I was there. Klaus's voice was flat. I was a boy, younger than Jan. I watched the carts go through the streets, collecting the dead. I watched them dig the pits. I watched them throw the bodies in, layer after layer, like herring in a barrel. He paused. We burned the blankets, we burned the clothes, we burned the beds, and still the sickness came back. What do we do? Klaus did not answer. He turned and walked away, and Bjorn heard him shouting orders on the deck. The ship moved. Not much, just a shift in the anchor line. And Bjorn realized they were preparing to leave. Matteo stood at the rail, looking at the island. Funchal was beautiful in the morning light, the white houses sparkling, the green hills rising to the clouds. He had hoped to trade here sugarcane, wine, perhaps even the famous dragon's blood, the red resin that came from the trees of Madeira, used for medicine and magic. But there would be no trading now. The plague was on board, and the island would not welcome them. We cannot stay, he said to Klaus. They will burn us in the harbor. They will shoot flaming arrows into our sails. They will do whatever it takes to keep the sickness from their shores. I know. We cannot go back to Lisbon. The plague is there. We cannot go to Morocco. The Moors will sink us before we land. We cannot go to the Canaries. The Spanish will quarantine us for 40 days, and we do not have 40 days of food. Then where? Matteo pointed west. The open sea, the ocean, the place where there are no ports, no kings, no customs officials. We sail until John is better, or until he is dead, and then we decide. And if the rest of us get sick, then we die. All of us? And the Sea Wolf becomes a ghost ship, drifting west until she falls off the edge of the world. Mateo smiled, but there was no humor in it. That is the risk. You knew it when you signed on. I signed on to carry cargo, not to die of plague. You signed on to do what I told you. The cargo is part of that. The plague is part of that. Mateo turned away from the rail. Weigh anchor, set a course for the west, and pray to whatever god you have left. The anchor came up, the sail filled with wind. The Sea Wolf turned her bow to the west, away from the island, away from land, away from everything familiar. Bjorn watched Funchal shrink behind them. The white houses fading into the green fading into the haze. He had been on the island for only 2 days. He had not even set foot on the shore. Now he wondered if he ever would. He went to the cabin. Jan was alone. No one else would go inside, not even Klaus. The boy lay on the blanket, his face flushed, his breathing ragged. Bjorn knelt beside him, dipped a cloth in the water bucket, and wiped Jan's forehead. The cloth came away hot. "You should not be here," Jan whispered. "You will get sick." "I am already sick, sick of the sea, sick of the plague, sick of watching people die." Bjorn wrung out the cloth, dipped it again. "You are not going to die, Jan. Do you hear me? You are not going to die." Jan tried to laugh. It came out as a cough. "You are a bad liar, almost as bad as Mateo." "I am learning. Mateo is teaching me." They sat in silence. The ship rocked gently. The sun moved across the sky, and the cabin grew hotter, and the smell grew worse. Bjorn did not leave. He stayed by Jan's side, wiping his forehead, giving him water, holding his hand when the shaking got bad. On the second day, the lumps appeared. Bjorn saw them first on Jan's neck, small, hard swellings, like almonds under the skin, then on his armpits, then in his groin. The boy cried out when Bjorn touched them, and Bjorn pulled his hand back as if burned. "Buboes," Gaston said. He stood in the doorway, his face pale. He had seen plague before in Bordeaux. "That is what they call them. The lumps, they grow, they turn black. Then the skin splits, and the pus comes out, and the man dies." "How long?" "Days. Sometimes a week, sometimes less." Gaston crossed himself out. "I will not go in there. I am sorry. I have seen enough death. I cannot watch another." Bjorn did not blame him. He was not sure he could watch another either, but he could not leave. Jan was alone. Jan was dying. And Bjorn was the only one who remembered what it was like to be 15 and afraid. That night, Eric fell ill. He had been sleeping on the deck, away from the cabin, away from Jan. But the sickness did not need close contact. It traveled in the air, the sailors said, or in the fleas that lived in the blankets, or in the blood of the rats that ran through the hold. No one knew. No one cared. Eric was sick, and that was all that mattered. He lay on the deck, wrapped in his cloak, his face gray, his hands shaking. "Cold," he said, "so cold." But when Bjorn touched his forehead, the heat was there, the same heat, the same fever, the same fire that burned inside Jan. "2," Klaus said. "Now we have 2. 3, Thomas said. He was standing near the mast, his arms wrapped around his body. "I feel it too, the headache, the chills. It is starting." Klaus looked at the sky. The stars were out, cold and bright. The same stars that had guided sailors for 1,000 years. They did not care about plague. They did not care about anything. They just hung there, burning, indifferent. "We need to find land," Klaus said. "We need to put the sick ashore. It is the only way." Where? Matteo asked. There is no land. The nearest land is Africa, and Africa is 300 miles away. We do not have 300 miles of water. We have 3 sick men and a crew that's falling apart. Then we turn back. We go to Madeira. We beg them to take the sick. They will not. You know they will not. They will kill us before they let us land. Matteo walked to the rail, looked out at the darkness. There is only one thing we can do. We wait. We pray. And we hope that the sickness burns itself out. Prayer has never stopped a plague. Then we hope. Hope is cheaper than prayer. On the 3rd day, John stopped speaking. His eyes were open, but they did not see. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The buboes had grown larger, darker. The skin stretched tight over them like the skin of a drum. Bjorn sat beside him, holding his hand, telling him stories that he could not hear. There was a girl in Bergen, Bjorn said. Her name was Sigrid. She had red hair like fire. She smelled of wool and summer. I kissed her once behind the fish market. Her lips tasted of salt. I think I loved her. I do not know. I was young, younger than you. Jan did not respond. I left her because I was afraid, not of her, of staying, of waking up in the same place every day, of knowing exactly what tomorrow would bring. Bjorn paused. I am not afraid anymore. I would give anything to wake up in the same place every day, to know what tomorrow would bring, to have someone to kiss behind the fish market whose lips tasted of salt. Jan's hand twitched. Bjorn squeezed it. Then Jan's hand went limp and his breathing changed, slower, shallower. The pauses between breaths growing longer. No, Bjorn said. No, Jan, stay with me. But Jan did not stay. He slipped away quietly, without a sound, his face relaxing into something like peace. The pauses grew longer. The breaths grew softer. And then there were no more breaths, and the cabin was silent. And Bjorn was alone with the body of a boy who had wanted to be a sailor. He did not cry. He had not cried since he was a child when his mother died, and he had promised himself that he would never cry again. But something happened inside him, a cracking, a breaking, like the hull of a ship hitting a rock. He sat in the darkness, holding Jan's hand, and felt the crack spread. The door opened. Matteo stood there, a lantern in his hand, its light casting long shadows. He's gone? Yes. Matteo said nothing. He set the lantern on the floor, knelt beside Bjorn, and put a hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time. 2 men in a small cabin with the body of a boy between them. We have to bury him, Matteo said finally. At sea. It is the sailor's way. I know. Do you want to do it, or should I? I will do it. Bjorn stood up. His legs were stiff. His back ached. He had not slept in 3 days. He was my friend. I will do it. They wrapped Jan in a piece of canvas, the same canvas that had covered the cargo in the hold. They tied weights to his feet, stones from the ballast,